الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله رب إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة وجاهد في سبيل الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in speaking about the creation of humanity, He begins in discussing this in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah by first telling us what we're commanded to do. Before He tells us that He's creating us, He tells us what He wants us to do. يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم لعلكم تتقون والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. O people, and this is a general command to everybody. يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم. So Allah hasn't even told us that He's going to create us or anything yet. The first thing He's telling us is what to do. Worship Allah. O you and you who He's created before you. Why is this worship being enacted? لعلكم تتقون. So there is a consequence of the worship. There are a type of people who you meet and subhanallah, this person has a certain type of acceptability, qabul. They're just easy to be around and people love them to be around us. And when you look at their acts of worship, it's minimal. They just do the basics. The 5 daily prayers, Ramadan, and that's it. They don't do anything extra. But subhanallah, once this person is around, you just feel light emanating from them. On the other hand, you have people who worship a lot. Tahajjud, 2 days a week, Mondays and Thursdays, the middle days of the month, they're doing all acts of worship. But there is something heavy about their presence that you just don't like. That tells you that there is something that has not been translated from the act of worship. Whereas the one who's doing just minimal acts, as it's come in the hadith, the beloved ﷺ was asked about a woman who does a lot of acts of worship, but nobody is safe from her tongue. And he said, لا خير فيها. There's no good in her. Whereas a woman who barely was doing the basics, but she had a secret with Allah. That one is going to go to the garden. So the first thing you have to acknowledge and recognize is my ritual acts are supposed to indicate a type of relationship that I have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if all I'm getting from this is just toil, just getting tired and hungry, but it's not translating in my relationships with people and how I'm treating them, because ultimately when you're treating somebody, when you're engaging with someone in any transaction, whatever the transaction is, you're engaging in a transaction with Allah. If you're in the market, it's a transaction that is about trustworthiness. Are you cheating in the market? Are you overcharging? Are you not doing the task to code that you were demanded of? If it's a transaction with your spouse, that's a nikah, that's a aqd, that's a transaction, that's a contract with Allah. So are you meeting the responsibilities and the duties that are embedded within that? With your children, this is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's given you. Are you fulfilling the trust? It's not enough to just do the acts of worship and then not see that translate. You know, in our modern era, a lot of us have fallen, unfortunately, into the secular dichotomy. The religion is what you do at home. Keep it in the closet. But when you go to the market, when you go to work, you're just like everybody else. This is how we act. And I'm speaking to myself before I speak to anybody else. This is a reminder to myself. I use this to remind myself before I remind anybody else. So the first thing is that. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the creation. And He doesn't get into, like if you open the book of Genesis, it goes into so-and-so is the father of so-and-so, who's the father of so-and-so. It's just the genealogy, Genesis, the origin. But Allah tells us, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah has declared unto the angels that I'm going to place a vicegerent, a custodian, a viceroy, a khalifa, a successor on the land. The original purpose of our creation in getting us to worship is to be on the land. It's not to be in the garden yet. This is just a transition stage. And we're here to be tested, to see how we're going to do that. And we're going to be succeeding one after another. There's going to be generations of us that are doing this. What is entailed in that? This custodianship. There's a cultivation that's entailed in that. We're supposed to actually be cultivating the land. We're supposed to be building it. This is not a monk type of religion where you just go and you abandon the world and detach from it, and that's the highest form of spirituality. In fact, the highest form of spirituality, as the Qawm, the masters tell us, is to be someone who is in khalwa whilst you're in jalwa. You're in a state of seclusion, detachment internally from the world and the happenings of the world, whilst you're engaged in the world. The point is not to be lazy and do nothing physically. No, it's to do everything physically. To intellectually engage yourself with the task that you're doing because you want to perfect it. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ إِذَا عَمِلَ أَحَدُكُمْ عَمَلًا أَن يُتْقِنَهُ. Allah loves it when one of you does a job, when you do it, that you perfect it. You're in construction, you don't just quickly finish off and just leave. You really take the time to make sure that the task is done properly. Oh, I was only paid until this time. Who cares? Me, myself at the hospital, I have a particular roster. I'm supposed to end at this time. And I could leave. That's when it ended. And I could just hand over to the next doctor that's covering after me. But sometimes I think this is not good for the patient. I know this patient and I know how they're going to react, and I just need to sit a little bit, maybe for half an hour, 45 minutes, just to make sure that what I just did right now actually pans out the way that I expect it to. So out of responsibility to the patient, to my work, sure, I'm not going to get paid for it. Who cares? Because who's watching? Allah has entrusted this person in front of me in this position of need, and I'm the one providing the care. So it is not about the money anymore. It's about a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. We keep coming back to this verse, and I mention it quite often in many of the khutbahs. And the reason for it is as a reminder, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ ذِكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah created us for one single purpose, which is to worship Him and to know Him. That's it. مَا أُرِيدُ مِنْهُم مِّن رِزْقٍ وَمَا أُرِيدُ أَن يُطْعِمُونَ. I don't want them to give me any sustenance. Allah is not looking for us to pay Him anything. And Allah is not looking for us to go out and toil and stress out and fight and battle so that we make more money. Because all of that was already written. It's already predetermined. The drug dealer who goes out and he sells however much coke and however much amphetamines that they sell, and the money that they make, you're going to make that money regardless. That money was coming to you because it was written. You just chose the prohibited way of doing it. And if you employed your intellect and actually did the right thing, Allah would grant you the openings through legitimate means without harming society and yourself. The thief who stole the money, they were going to get the money. They just hastened. They were not patient enough. All that was written in the womb. When each one of us was put into the womb, Allah sent an angel and they wrote all of it. And rizq is not just about income. It's also about your health. How long you're going to live. All this fad about longevity and living to 100 and living to this and living to that, all that is written. It's already predetermined. What matters now is إِنَّ لِجَسَدِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا. So the reason a Muslim, for example, would engage in properly taking care of their body and their health is not because I'm interested in living to 100. It's because I would like it. The goal for a believer is not I want to run a marathon when I'm 100. The goal for a believer is I would love it when I'm 100 to be able to stand up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in prayer and not require a crutch or require to be seated. And you know what? Some of the awliya, some of the masters, Zakaria al-Ansari, for example, rahimahullah, one of the great mashayikh of al-Azhar, 100 years old. Allah would give him the strength to get up when he's 100 with no support to pray his prayer, and then he would be zapped of that strength afterwards. Many mashayikh we hear about this. But imagine if you at an older age are able to do all of these things. So now your intention, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, your intention now when you go to the gym or you go do jiu-jitsu or go work out or whatever it is that you're engaging in is not because I want to be the baddest guy in town or that I want to live to 100 so that I can do these things. No, it's because this body has a right and I'm going to be asked about it. Imagine that. Allah coming to you on the day of judgment, and of the things that we each will be asked for, your body is going to turn to you and Allah will give it a tongue to speak back and say, why'd you give me type 2 diabetes? Why'd you give me hypertension? Why'd you give me all these problems? We were fine. You could have eaten this, you could have eaten that, you could have cleaned your diet this way. The Prophet ﷺ gave you a prescription of how to eat. Why did you not take care of me? You know the adage, the body is a temple, as they say. So this is how a believer would look at it. All of your actions. When you go do cardio and you're running, you know, if you're reciting Quran, رواية ورش عن طريق الأزرق, the mudud in it are mushabba'a. They're very long. So if you do it properly with the proper stops, you need some lungs on you. Your VO2 max has to be on point. So imagine you now doing your cardio and doing your training because I would like to recite the Quran without having to take a pause every 2 words because I'm running out of breath. You're smoking, your lungs are going to come and ask about that. You're vaping, your lungs are going to come and ask about that. Every little thing that you do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will begin with the little things on the day of judgment. The things that you're not thinking about. Which is going to stress everybody even more on the day of judgment. Because you're going to be thinking, whoa, I had no idea. I'm being asked about these things. I did many things bigger than this that I thought were more significant, and I'm not asked about those yet. And I'm being taken into account for those little things. There is a responsibility, and it's generational. I was just listening to a discourse on the children of Gaza. And the question was, and it's a very interesting point that the sister was mentioning. The children of Gaza have a reflexive response to trauma that is unlike anybody else. You have a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old coming out of the rubble, and what do they say? Reflexively, they're being asked in the middle of a trauma, Alhamdulillah, Fida al-Aqsa. That type of response is not memorized. It is not taught like that. This is lived experience because that's the environment that they grew up in. They were raised and they saw, they observed their parents and the way they talk, and that did not stop them from becoming, they have the highest education per capita, Gaza, the highest Quran memorizers per capita. They have the highest diversity of education. They have artists. They have literary masters. They have scientists. They have all of that. So there are people who love life and they engage with life, but at the same time, their connection is with Allah. And all of this trauma that they're experiencing this is the test. They're preparing for the test. And we see that in terms of their response to the test, that they're passing it. Now that poses a question for each one of us. We get confronted with little things, little inconveniences, and we just do this and hit the head, and what happened, or where am I going to come up with this, and you just got an unexpected bill, and how am I going to deal with this bill now, and where am I going to get the money for this? None of that is over there. Your rizq is written already. The beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is teaching this to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu when he was a young man. Ya ghulam, young man. And this is for all the 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds out here. Inni u'allimuka kalimat. I'm teaching you a few words. Few pieces of advice. احفظ الله يحفظك. Safeguard Allah and Allah will safeguard you. What does that mean? You observe the limits of Allah and Allah will safeguard you because you're watching out for Allah. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. Safeguard Allah and Allah will be in your direction. Allah will save you from things that you didn't even know happened. Things that are coming in your direction that you're not aware of, Allah will just turn them away from you. Calamities. Because why? Your relationship is with Allah. Allah's watching out for you. Who's got your back? Your buddies? Your homies? No. I've got Allah, the King of Kings. وَإِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ. When you ask Allah. You know the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam in Badr. I'm always struck by the mannerism of the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in every state. But this particular one really strikes me. Before the battle of Badr, he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam stands up on top of the mountain. And he raises his arms up this high. His rida falls from his back. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was bringing it back up to get it on his shoulders. And he said, Ya Allah, if this isaba, if this group of people are destroyed, you will not be worshipped in the land. Imagine that. Look at the discourse between the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he's our teacher. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. How many of us have actually talked to Allah in that way? If this group of people, this 300 some odd guys are destroyed, you will not be worshipped in the land. Oh Allah, you promise me, فَأَنْجِزْ. Make it happen. Allah promised each one of us, ادعوني أستجب لكم. Call upon me and I will respond to you. So how many of us thought you're in a state of constriction? Okay? Because that's the nature of life. We go through expansions and constrictions all the time. So you're in a state of constriction. You have something really heavy and you feel like you got nobody else. And you can think of somebody who you can call who can help you out. But instead you hold yourself back. Instead of picking up the phone, you drop the phone and you raise your hands to Allah and you say, oh Allah, you know my state better than I know my state. You know my need better than I know my need. There is something I want to ask of you, but I'm too shy to ask because you're more knowledgeable than me. And I don't know if I'm going to ask you something that's going to be bad for me. So I want you to take care of my affair. And all I ask of you is relief. In the best way that you see. You're the wise, you're the knowledgeable. And I'm the unwise and I'm the ignorant. And to actually turn to Allah in that way, I guarantee you, this is mujarrab. This is tried and tested. Scientifically validated. You do it like this, the relief, the faraj will come to you sooner than you anticipated. You might go to sleep, wake up the next day and you find things just all of a sudden, subhanAllah, just worked out. There is a nurse, radiology nurse, of how al-arzaq, you know, the rizq, the sustenance is guaranteed and you shouldn't worry. Because it teaches us something about if your relationship is with Allah, then Allah will take care of you in ways you never thought would be taken care of. This radiology nurse has a sister come in, her son has cancer, he's got ongoing treatments, and he's about to commence the treatment, and she says, this is our last time here. This is it, we're just going to do this, and then we're just going to say goodbye. So he's concerned, like, what happened? Are you moving somewhere? Are you going somewhere? He says, no, but my husband lost his job, and this is a private facility, and we can't afford it. So this is the last treatment that we can afford, and that's it. Now this nurse has been saving his money for about 20, 30 years to try to go to Hajj. And it came down time that he's going to go to Hajj and they're going to pay the money. So he thinks for a minute, and then he goes to the HR department, he goes to the finance department, and he says, do we have any other way that we can help this? Do we have a charitable fund? Do we have some way to fund this child's treatment? She's been coming here for 6 months. And they said, this is a private entity, it's not a charity. Unfortunately, we can't do it. So he tells the accountant, look, here's some money. I'm going to fund the treatment for the next 6 months. And he takes out his entire savings for Hajj. And he pays for the child's treatment. And he says, can you just tell the lady that we have a charitable fund that we actually help people in your state, that we can do this? Don't tell her that it came from me. So they do this arrangement. He says to Allah, he's making dua, he's like, oh Allah, you know, there's nothing more beloved to me than to go to Hajj. I've been saving for this long, I really want to go to Hajj, but I can't make it now because this child needs it more. So I'm going to prefer the child over my needs. Just take care of him and save him and cure him and all of that. So he dissociated from his own worldly desires and his worship desires, because this is an ananiya. There's a type of selfishness in worship as well, that he preferred this child over himself. What happens? He goes to sleep, he wakes up the next day and he says, I've never woken up in more elated, good mood that I've ever felt in my entire life. He gets a phone call from his boss and he says, the owner of the hospital is going on Hajj. And his private nurse, his wife is pregnant and she's in her last few days and she's due any time. And he can't go with him because he needs to be with his wife. She can give birth any moment. So we suggested that you go with him on Hajj, all expenses paid. So get this. This guy goes on Hajj now, all expenses paid, with the owner of the hospital. So he's not just going to Hajj like everybody else, he's going VIP package. All right? He goes on Hajj, he talks to the owner about what happened, and the owner says, what do you do in the hospital? What happened? Is there anything? He tells him about the story of this woman. The owner comes back and he says, first of all, we're going to start a charity fund. We're going to fund the rest of this child's treatments indefinitely. We're going to return your money back to you that you paid. And her husband that lost his job, I got another company that I can give him a job in it. This type of thing happens all the time. If you're not in a state of heedlessness and are actually watching, it proves who's the provider. So for all of us here, and again, I'm speaking to myself, do not belittle anything that you give. The way that you actually earn more is not by stressing out and fighting everybody about your billings and your companies and this and that. The way you earn more is وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. That's how you earn more. And what is shukr? How do you show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your income? You have to dedicate a portion of your income to just charitable giving. How many of us have actually went around and asked, and I know the mosque here is connected well, mashallah, to go to the people in responsibility here, the leaders of the community, go like, is there any family that's in need of something? Is there somebody who's struggling with some bills to pay? Can I just anonymously take care of somebody's affairs for a month? There's somebody who's struggling. How many of us have done that? Just to show concern for the community in that way. And think in percentages. If you're struggling to save money, all the financial gurus, and they'll tell you the same thing. Make sure that your expenses are 50 to 60% of your income. Make sure that you're investing about 20%, saving about 20%, 10% for whatever, this and that. Why don't you dedicate, just say like, all right, 10% of my monthly income from now on is going to be an automatic withdrawal that I'm going to be dedicating to charitable giving. It could be $100. It could be $1,000. It could be $10,000. Whatever it is, the 10% is going to be of your take-home income. That might be feeling a little bit of a stretch, but you're doing that with the intention of gratitude. Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu is going to the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam with half of his wealth. Imagine that. Imagine you going to your investment accounts, your super, your income, everything, and you're siphoning 50% of it, and you're coming to the masjid and you're saying, this is for Gaza. 50%. And you're feeling, this was really hard, but I feel really good about myself. Only to find Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu has siphoned all of his accounts, all of his retirement funds, everything he's got. He sold all his furniture, he sold all his cars. He's got just the clothes on his back. And he's coming with everything. Big fat check, and this is for Gaza. I'm not saying that you all should do that, but I'm saying just think about the level, the status, the thinking of these people. It's about a nadra, it's about a perspective, a context. How do you look at what you have? The wealth and the knowledge and the health and everything that you have are not yours. These are things that have been attributed to you. They've been given to you for a period of time. And the proof that you do not possess it, they're not yours, is when you die, you take none of it, and you don't even have a say in how it's divided. Allah decides how it's divided. So, take it easy. Relax. This life is not worth it. اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا متاع ولعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر. Know that this worldly life is nothing but just games and play. وتفاخر بينكم, and just showing off against one another. Oh, you got that Porsche? Is it this trim level? Nah, it's not really a Porsche anymore. You got to get the GTS. If you didn't get the GTS, it's not a real one. Oh, you got that range? You got the base model? Oh, you just want to look rich, but you're not actually, you can't afford it. وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. And just, oh, I got this deal and I got this many children. How many? MashaAllah. You know, 5 is really difficult to handle. I wish I just, the 3 was really good, but we ended up with 5. And this worldly life is nothing but enjoyment for the one who's deluded. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله. Engaged in the world in all of its aspects with the guidance of Allah and His beloved sallallahu alaihi wa sahbihi wasallam. We are a people who build. When the Crusaders went through Andalusia, they were puzzled and shocked. How did they get the fountain to bring out water to fly out like that, using gravity and the geometric shapes? And anybody that's traveled to southern Spain would appreciate the beauty of the architecture and how they did it. You would think that these are people that are trying to live here forever, but they were just replicating beauty and the garden in the world. Our engagement in the world is a physical engagement, and your stress should be more of an intellectual stress about making sure that you perfect the task that you're doing and that you're pleasing Allah in it. And yes, you can stay up at night and think about, like, how can I build this business better and how can I get this deal and how can I do that? But all of it needs to just stay here. It never goes into here because the outcome is Allah's. We don't know what the outcome is. That's not our business. The outcome is Allah's. And whenever you're presented with a test where you can take a shortcut, you might cheat someone, you might do something questionable, what you do is say, maybe it's not for me. It's not part of my deal here. I'm dealing with Allah. I'm not dealing with shayateen here. So the more that you do that, what you'll find is barakah in your time, and you'll find barakah in your wealth. There are plenty of people who will make $200, $300, $400, $1 million a year, and they live paycheck to paycheck. And they go, like, what happened with the money? No barakah. There's no blessing. Meanwhile, you have people that are making 70 grand a year, the average Australian income, and mashallah, they're comfortable, they're living. It's like the age-old story of the man who comes in by a guy who's fishing. He goes fishing, gets 2 fish per day, and then comes back and feeds his family, and then he just hangs out and just watches the sun and watches the birds. And then a guy in a Mercedes passes by, and he says, hey, I got a deal for you. Why don't we just get another boat, and then you can hire somebody, and then we could catch more fish, and then you can sell all the fish, and then you can build up your wealth and get really rich, and you can do this like me. And he's like, then what? Then what? Then what? And eventually he says, and then you can relax and sit down and hang out with your children. He's like, that's what I'm doing right now. The traditional way was, I'm not expecting to see tomorrow. That's delusion. Each one of us can drop on a dime. This is the nature of life. I see that in hospital all the time. I see people that walked into the hospital and never walked back out. I see people that walked in and came out in a wheelchair because there was something sinister happening and they didn't realize it. Right now I have a guy in the hospital. This guy was a genius electrician. Couldn't sit. Always running about and around. Walks in. Turns out he had a tumor growing around his spine since he was 15 years old. For 15 years, this tumor grew, no idea. Until finally the symptoms got him, and then he goes in, gets checked out, emergency admission, can't walk anymore. Now I got to think about life differently. It's very confronting. So thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessing of health and take care of yourself. Thank Allah for the blessing of wealth and make sure you take care of others through it. And use your strength to help yourself and to help others. Make sure that you dedicate some of your dua and some of your resources to spreading good and spreading help and aid for the community. And don't get too attached and mired with the happenings of the world. And don't let conflict with brothers and sisters tarnish your heart and obstruct it from a relationship with Allah. Because Allah tells us, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. A heart that is filled with angst and rancor and hatred and animosity and conflict with people, with the creation, this is a heart that has no himmah. There's no resolve. This is a heart that is not attached to Allah. But if you're with Allah, be easygoing and let things go. The beloved ﷺ tells us that most of the people that are occupying paradise, al-buluh, the simpletons. Who's a simpleton? Someone who just, but they're cheating you, bro. They're making fun of you. They're mocking this. They're taking advantage. Let them take advantage. It's fine. They're not going to get any more than what's meant for them, and they're going to take anything that's meant for me anyways. So it's fine. I'm not going to get caught up in it. I'm concerned about what Allah thinks of me, not what that person thinks of me. اللهم اعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين اللهم اهدنا صوابا اللهم اهدنا صوابا اللهم فرج عن أهل غزة اللهم انصر المجاهدين والمقاومين في الأنفاق اللهم انصر المجاهدين والمقاومين في الأنفاق اللهم سدد رميهم اللهم عليك بالصهاينة المجرمين اللهم أرنا فيهم عجائب قدرتك اللهم يسر لإخواننا المجاهدين ويسر لأهلنا في غزة ووفقنا لكل ما تحب وترضى يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم ارزقنا حبك وحب من يحبك وحب من يقربنا حبهم إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أقم الصلاة